to you. This was given to us by Garshan Rinpoche. It is this poem, basically, by a Tibetan monk from the 13th century. It's considered to be the essence or the condensed version of the Dalai Lama's favorite book, which is a work by Shantideva, as a 7th century Indian monk. Shantideva, Shanti, peace, Deva, gods, peace of the gods, who was a great figure. And he wrote the book that the Tibetans consider to be the greatest book on conduct that was written in Sanskrit. So when they talk about, view, meditation, and action, action is conduct. So of those three, the greatest book in Sanskrit, Tibetans believe, is Shantideva's Entering the Way of the Bodhisattva. Entering the Path of Enlightenment has different titles in English, but anyway, it's the only book you'll find on Shantideva. His other great work hasn't been translated, as far as I know. So this is considered the essence of that. So it's very valuable. Gar Rinpoche teaches from it. He's handed out, I think, tens of thousands of these in different languages all over the world, and to us, which was really wonderful. The first 21 verses are a Chinese emperor once asked a Buddhist master, to sum up Buddhism, and he said, do not harm, help others, liberate all sentient beings. So the first 21 verses here represent the do not harm type of practice. And after that is the absolute teachings of the conventional view. When the greatness of Buddhism is that, one, it talks about realization. And this is something extremely valuable, and it's really what everyone's looking for, but they don't even know. For many people, the conscious thought hasn't arisen, or it's arisen in some other kind of form, or it hasn't risen at all, but it's still our nature. In the great Kalachakra Tantra, it says all beings are Buddhas, but we're just not aware of it. So the practice of Buddhism is just the practice of coming to understand who and what you are truly. So when we say do not harm, then help others, then liberate all sentient beings, you can see how radical this idea of realization is, because what are you talking about? Liberate all sentient beings? How can I possibly do that? I can't get along with my boss. How do you liberate everyone? How do you liberate all the earthworms? I mean, it becomes beyond conceptual, which of course it is. We can't understand it from a conceptual mind. To give you an idea, this huge tome that I have in my hand is the history of the Nyingma, which is the oldest tradition within Tibetan Buddhism. And this history was written by a contemporary Lama who's passed away, Dudjom Rinpoche, who was the father of Lama Tarchen's guru. Anyway, this is an extensive text. The man was beyond. So these are from the words of Atisha. Now, Atisha was an Indian monk who came to Tibet like in the 12th century, I think. And it was the second great wave of Buddhism to come to Tibet. And he's the founder, so to speak. He didn't found anything, but it was from his effort came the three, what are called the Sarma, the new traditions of Tibet. So they come from the 1100s. Anyway, the Sakyas, the Kagyu, which we find ourselves within. Ka is speech, Gyu is secret. The esoteric tradition, things that are not contained in the texts that are still transmitted, basically realization. And then the Geluks, shining virtue. This Dalai Lama is the best known of the Geluk teachers. So Atisha came from, is a very interesting figure, an Indian monk. He heard about a great monk who taught refuge, that is seeking solace, seeking liberation from suffering in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That's said to be the refuges. In an outer sense, it has meanings which are easily understood, but it has inner meanings too. The refuge, the inner refuge, is seeking refuge in our true nature. That's the Buddha. Buddha means to awake. It's the awakened quality of our mind that oddly we are almost always ignorant of, because we're distracted into our alertness, our awareness on the products of the mind, so to speak, the distractions. So at any rate, Atisha was inspired by this teacher that he heard about, who was just teaching what seems to be kind of like Buddhism 101, but he saw the profundity of it. So he traveled, can you imagine, from India to Indonesia, where this man was teaching. Indonesia was Buddhist at that time. And I don't know his whole history as far as, states of realization and how he progressed on the path. But nonetheless, eventually he came back from Indonesia. He was coming back, and there was a tremendous storm as he approached either Sri Lanka or India, I can't remember which. And we have this prayer that we do on Tuesday nights in the White Tara practice, where the boat was sinking and everybody is freaking out. And Atisha spontaneously versed this prayer to Tara, and the waters calmed. So that's the kind of being that he was. And then later he came to Tibet. So just a short verse from him about realization. Since in the manner of an ocean, its depths and other shores are not found by words, example, and the intellect, it is the great, profound reality. So this is the situation that we're in. We have a kind of greatness that is unseen, and it's not a worldly greatness. It's the greatness of the Buddha, the same realization that the Buddha had. When you look, it's just amazing to me, even in my lifetime, a short lifetime, you see, what things were praised as values then become criticized. And there's just this cycle going on, always changing, seemingly nothing stable. Realization is beyond stability. It is the nature of things itself. So like it says here, in the manner of an ocean, its depths of this profound reality, the depths and other shores are not found by words, examples, and intellect. It is the great profound reality. So what do? We can't find by words, examples, and the intellect. We can't find it. Going back to the 37 practices, those first 21 verses are the teachings of do no harm. And the next ones are try to help beings. And then finally, liberate all beings. Buddhism presents the full range of the path. And this is why it's so valuable, because the breadth of it all and the diversity of it all, you don't have to fit yourself into somebody else's idea of who and what you should be. You are as you are right now. You can look at the 18 different qualities that marks a precious human life, which qualifies as the most advantageous platform from which to realize the nature of things and the nature of ourselves. And you can check them off. And you say, my goodness, I have all those things, but I'm unemployed. Doesn't matter. That's not on the list. You can trust when you see the changes that go on in one lifetime. The things that people fight about. What was good is now bad. What was bad is now good. There's no refuge in that. And then you see 2,600 years of the Buddha's history. You read the teachings from 2,000 years ago, and they're the same. How is it they haven't been corrupted? It's because they stand on something valid. So, when we face this, when an ordinary Tibetan, for instance, the Dharma has been there since what, the 700s or the 800s. They have a kind of confidence, and the Tibetan lamas who come, often don't start sort of teaching at the place where we're at, so to speak, in terms of cultural understanding or whatever. They have such confidence in the Dharma. It's kind of like we have the confidence in, Isaac Newton. No one's running around saying Newton was wrong. Newton was an idiot. We have a cultural confidence that we have because we've seen the results of this. It's been tested out. Every time they shoot some probe off to Jupiter or something, I still think of it more as a miracle, but it's just, motion mechanics. They got it down that good. So that's how a Tibetan faces the Dharma. They don't necessarily know. But for us, it takes sometimes some, deeper explanation and not deeper necessarily, but culturally. So it presents this full range, and as this book and the Nyingma present it, 9 different levels of practice. 9 different levels. The first 2 are mentioned in our book as in the 37 practices. Also Garam Rinpoche has said that the whole Buddhist path is found in this little book. You have to know how to read it, so to speak, but it's that kind of a resource. See if I can find it. They talk about the hearers and the solitary realizers. Of these 9 different levels of practice, those are the first 2. The hearers are called the Shravakas in Sanskrit, and the solitary realizers are called the Pratyeka Buddhas. It's said that the Pratyeka Buddha practices like the rhinoceros, solitary in the jungle. Can't find the particular verse, but anyway, that's what they're talking about when they talk about the hearers and the solitary practitioner. What are they doing? The hearers are realizing the emptiness of self. That's their whole practice. They come to realize the emptiness of self. The solitary practitioner realizes the emptiness of self, but has a slight realization of the emptiness of phenomenon too. But still, the motivation is basically to liberate yourself from suffering. That's what you're thinking about. This is a partial realization, although it's vast and profound. It's said that one who attains the completion of that is titled an arhat, means conqueror in Sanskrit, and can rest in that total peacefulness. It's said for even an eon. They think it's the final realization, and it's very pleasant to be there. There's no suffering. They have transcended suffering. But in the teachings, it says that at some point, they will have further purified just by remaining in this state and their negative karmas, having been transformed, and whatever still misunderstandings they have of the nature of reality, the nature of their mind, that's still a purification that's going on just simply by them resting free from suffering. And at some point, a Buddha appears to their mind, and light goes from the heart of the Buddha to their heart, and they wake up a little bit more, and they realize, oh, I haven't transversed the whole path. There's more. And they become aware of the infinite sentient beings out there who are unenlightened, and although they're Buddhas, they don't know it. And so even the idea of those sentient beings suffering is an imperfection in their mind, and then they enter what's called the Mahayana. So the third level of practice, we've got solitary practitioners, hearers, solitary practitioners, and now the ordinary Mahayana, the great path. Yana means path or career. Maha means great. So like, for instance, Gandhi, his title was Mahatma, Maha Atman, the great soul. So now the Mahayana. This is what the Dalai Lama teaches. This is what's in this little book. Now, for the first time, it can take you all the way to Buddhahood. And what's the difference? Well, the texts say that one who is practicing on the level of an arhat, who can remain without suffering or distraction for an eon, think about that, the state of that. That's said to be the equivalent of the light emanated by a glowworm or a lightning bug. Buddhahood is said to be the sun at high noon in India on the summer solstice. Tremendous light, tremendous wisdom is what that symbolizes. So this is the conventional level, right? This is what this little book is teaching. This is what the Dalai Lama teaches publicly. This is what we can, when we're dealing with words, examples, and intellect, it's that level that we can work on this. We can come to confidence through our intellect even, through engaging in the world instead of pushing it away. We push away our attachment to it, but our involvement with it, it becomes complete, really. So that's the sutra letter, we say, the recorded spoken words of the Buddha. Now, above that, on this path, are 6 different levels. Higher, 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 subtler, subtler, subtler. These are the tantric levels. These are liberate all sentient beings. So to give you an idea, our tradition here is one that says there aren't higher and lower teachings. All of these are just one teaching. You take any of them to their end and you find yourself and you find Buddhahood. And yet, we all have different kind of inclinations, immediately different capacities. And so it's like different medicines for the different state of your dis-ease. And so this is the greatness of the Dharma. And when I say Tibetan Buddhism, it has the danger of misleading people. That, oh, there's Tibetan Buddhism here, there's Chinese Buddhism here, there's Burmese Buddhism here. It's not like that. What's special about Tibet is just simply that the full range of the methods were preserved. And why? Because Tibet was so isolated. You know, there are warlike people originally behind the Himalayas, way out in Western China, past deserts, so the Chinese didn't bother them. I mean, they had an isolation, and what did they do? Remarkably, at a point in their history, they had conquered Central Asia, the capital of China even. They suddenly decided, the king decided, okay, we're going to be Buddhist now. And they sent for a period of like 300, 400 years, their best and brightest over the Himalayas to India. And at the peak of cultural development of Buddhism in India, 1,500 years after the Buddha passed away, they developed a written Tibetan language, and they translated the full range of Buddhist teachings from India to Tibet. And it's just a tremendous human achievement, which people generally not aware of. So therefore, the whole breadth of the tradition is there, which is very helpful to us because, again, you don't have to fit yourself into a box. Any one of these traditions will take you the whole way. But there are differences, differences. And sometimes you can have a certain kind of practice that just isn't resonating with you. There's nothing wrong with it in a sense. But whatever, a Tibetan Lama can be very skillful because here, you're doing this practice, it's just not working for me. Okay, do this. He or she has another arrow in his or her quiver that can give you. So it's very, very, it's overwhelming with method, with means. And this is extremely, extremely helpful. In the end, it's all just one thing that they're teaching. And that's what comes through too. So you can come to a Tibetan Lama, for instance, teaching, and even though if you were like me, feeling like completely like bewildered, that's not a bad mind state. It means that your mind is open and that there's a recognition of its own understanding. Where we get in trouble as human beings is that we think we know everything. It's like somewhere the poet Yeats said, the ignorant or something or the evil are filled with all passionate intensity. And most people, they're more virtuous, but they're not there. So these 6 levels of Tantra are the practice of the liberation of sentient beings right from the get-go. Now that takes faith because, that just doesn't seem true. How could it be? But that's what it is. On the sutric level, taking us to Buddhahood, what the Dalai Lama teaches publicly, The great teaching is bodhicitta. This desire to liberate all beings, and then further taking steps on the path to do that. Basically the practice of the 6 perfections. We're going up, up, up to what? To the perfection, prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom. It's a trip up, so to speak. But in the tantric practices, these 6 different other levels, the final levels, we're actually saying, okay, I'm up there already. And now the practice of liberating sentient beings, in a sense, is looking down at them. Instead of looking up to the perfection of wisdom, we already have that. We call it yeshe, which is primordial wisdom. It was the wisdom before anyone did anything. It's there. Now from that state, we're doing what we do. And at this level, the bodhicitta, this practice of this great limitless compassion in a conventional sense, perfection of it, becomes what are called the 5 perfections. So basically in the sutric level, the Dalai Lama's level, what he teaches publicly, the Dalai Lama knows all those higher levels. But anyway, to what he teaches publicly, this vastly loving compassion, that's what we're doing. On the tantric level, we're saying all of this is a pure land. All of these beings are bodhisattvas. My teacher is actually a Buddha, not just someone farther along the path, but a full Buddha. I can pray to him or her and blessings will come because I'm recognizing my own Buddha nature in someone else, which is the whole challenge. The teachings are the stainless, absolute wisdom teachings. And this place is a pure land. So you can see how when we practice the great virtues of the sutric level, we're going around and what do we do? From Shantideva's text or this one, when someone is hostile towards you, you're practicing patience. So we're using the imperfections of our view, the imperfections of this samsaric world, this imperfection of this material world. We're using all of those things as a stimulant to trigger the opposite response, the virtuous response. So now what does it mean? If you can really do that perfectly from moment to moment to moment, this whole world of suffering that the Buddha described, unenlightened world, becomes a pure land where everything is conducive to your practice. So in the tantric view, we just go there immediately. I'm going to say all of this is pure. And when someone's chewing you out, you hear that as wrathful mantra. It's a very difficult practice. But nonetheless, to even have this kind of confidence in the practice is extremely profound, and it works. The amazing thing of all of this is that you do these practices and you don't know how they work. That's not a problem. It's said to be 10 things that only a Buddha can know. One of them is how medicine works completely. Another is how mantra works. And then the other one is the complete workings of cause and effect. You don't have to have figured it out intellectually. I mean, you work on that, it helps increase your faith, but it's the faith that's the important thing. You can have an illiterate, uneducated, just because someone's illiterate doesn't mean they're not educated, but I'm taking an extreme example. You can have an unliterate, uneducated Tibetan peasant, but they, for some reason, through their karma, they have complete faith in Buddha's teachings. And they can experience like an instantaneous realization. So all of us, to one degree or another, have experienced that same kind of thing. You can be in a session, a meditation session, whether it's like a week long or even just 30 minutes long, and you can be wrestling with all sorts of distractions and thoughts, and you're thinking, I'm just completely out of this, and other people are saying, oh, I was in blissful state, and you're thinking, man, I'm just a schlep, all of this, and yet it ends and suddenly your mind's calm. That process that you were going through was a purification. It was actually a positive thing. But in our worldly way, we think this is wrong. Our ego is like trying to control. So, this faith in the teachings. This is a verse from Tsongkhapa, who's the founder of the Gelug's. Whoever perceives the cause and result of all things of samsara and nirvana to be always infallible. So infallible cause and effect. and destroys all their referential bases. So for instance, when we do hatred, when we feel angry towards someone, what's the basis for that? When we destroy those bases, Lama Tarchin said, for instance, it's like there's a great mountain. We live right now with this mental mountain we've created, and there are lakes there of suffering. They just hold suffering. That's just the nature of this mountain that we've created. And he said, with the tantric practice, the mountain goes away. So there's no place for that lake of suffering, just gone. That's the referential basis. All right, whoever perceives the cause and result of all things of samsara and nirvana to be always infallible and destroys all their referential basis, at that time enters the path pleasing to the Buddhas. As long as one continues to differentiate between the two understandings of appearances, which are infallibly interdependent, and emptiness, which is free from assertions. So if you're even making this distinction between appearances and emptiness, one will not yet realize the Buddha's intention. But when these understandings are simultaneous, that the appearances are emptiness and emptiness is appearances, without alternation, and if, having merely seen interdependence to be infallible, true conviction has destroyed all postures of objective clinging, at that time the scrutiny of the view is perfected. We have inherited, sitting here in Rochester, New York, speaking for myself, completely immersed in all sorts of worldly ideas, preoccupations, self-grasping, the whole kit and caboodle of what it means to be a human being. We have inherited this incredible tradition. They only write books like this to give us confidence. There's something that you can pound on. There's something that you can question, that you can dig into. This is extremely valuable. You're not taking something on blind faith. For us, in the sutric path, in our conventional way, it all comes down to bodhicitta. Since time without beginning, sentient beings have possessed, as their true nature, the primary seed of Buddhahood. But because of ignorance, they are unaware of their true nature. Ignorance sets up a play between subject and object and generates a state of endless confusion that is like a turning wheel. Not one of the countless motherly sentient beings lost in this state of utter confusion lacks the desire for happiness. Unfortunately, sentient beings wish for something entirely different from what they get, because they create only the causes for more suffering. Sentient beings have become rather crazy, so you must develop intense mercy and compassion for all of them. You must develop a commitment to help them cross the ocean of suffering and achieve the unsurpassable state of permanent happiness. This compassion is the generation of bodhicitta, the awakened mind. Since all sentient beings are somewhat crazy, and you are numbered among them, you can all be considered equal. You do not understand the causes of either happiness or suffering. Otherwise, you would understand why you live in suffering and how to obtain happiness. You would understand what life is all about, what you should abandon, and what you should accept to achieve permanent happiness. It is not sufficient to merely think about this predicament in which you are all stuck. To place other beings in a state of liberation, you must achieve liberation yourself. You cannot help anyone unless you have power. Your commitment must be deep. By dedicating yourself to the liberation of others, you awaken this aspirational compassion, and your wish to achieve liberation becomes focused on the needs of others. When you actually apply this aspiration, it's called practical application. Practical application is developed by accomplishing the generation stage practice of the Tantra and developing yourself as the Buddha, as a Buddha. Practicing the sadhana, the text, is the profound, swift path to fulfill this practical aspiration. All the teachings are pure. They all are completely interdependent with each other. You know, I think sometimes you think of the story of the Buddha, which we're going over on Thursday nights. I mean, it's just such a remarkable story. And because he taught for 45 years, there's just all sorts of stories that have been preserved, teachings, texts. Amazing. I mean, the texts weren't written down for 200 years, but orally they kept them, just like, you know, Homer recited the whole Iliad. Think of it. Or the Odyssey, sorry, not the Iliad, the Odyssey. At any rate, what do you do after this great accomplishment? I mean, here he is, a prince, just everything going for him, everything good, the best of the material world. And he renounces that, accomplishes the highest realizations of teachers of his day. And then he doesn't renounce that, but he just moves on forward. It wasn't satisfying. He went to his own path, this great ascetic path, thinking that if he could kill this sense of ego, that maybe wisdom would arise. He was going to starve it out, basically. And then he came to see that was false and discovered the middle way between complete, just getting more and more and more, and complete abnegation, just pushing all away. Found the middle path between those two. And in one night came to his great awakening. So if you were sitting under a tree in India in the jungle, and you suddenly came to omniscience, how would you talk to other people? And think of his first teaching. I mean, this first noble truth, the teaching of suffering, of dissatisfaction. All kind of worldly existence is inherently dissatisfactory. You cannot get to a stable happiness. And even there, the whole teaching is like is in that one teaching that he gave. It's amazing, because if you look at what is the nature, who is it that's suffering, for instance, and if you look in and in and in, what's discoverable is that we're not some sort of solid entity of, flesh and mind or something. I mean, we are on some level, but if you go in and in and in, there's no solid thing there. Rather, he taught that we're like a burning flame. Human beings are like a vast river flowing. Like, was it one of the Greeks, ancient Greeks, Heraclitus maybe, said we never step into the same river twice, because it's totally dynamic. But we are not aware of our incredibly dynamic nature. And when the Buddha said we're like a burning flame, it looks like there's a flame there, but it's actually dynamic, changing from instant to instant. You can't grab onto one thing and consolidate and say, that's the flame, something I can put my finger on. In Buddhism, flame is the symbol of wisdom. We are that true nature. We are this flame. And it's a dynamic thing, and that is compassion, the dynamism. Garvan Pache has said that we fly to enlightenment with two wings, wisdom and compassion. But the compassion they're talking about is with a capital C. It's not just, feeling pity on people, or I'm up here looking down. Dalai Lama says, because we have gained from all our motherly sentient beings that even gave us birth and existence, we're down here, the Bodhisattva's down here looking up to the suffering sentient beings. Turns everything upside down. And yet that's the path. And that's the path over 2,600 years to true, stable happiness, and further beyond that, to profound meaning and realization. Okay, so anyway, wouldn't you love to be able to read this big book? And understand it? It makes you naturally humble, And that's a good thing, because even if you're suffused with arrogance and pride as I am, you hear Garvan Pache teach, or you read a book or Garvan Pache's book, and you immediately have a feeling for what you don't know. And of course, that is wisdom. Knowing that you don't know is wisdom. Beyond words, beyond the intellect, all of this. And so it comes down to a simple kind of confidence in our own nature, and confidence in the path. Okay, So that's enough for me this morning, I think. Any questions briefly before we break for coffee and a little practice, Keen?
Yeah, just, I like that analogy of us being like a candle, because
Hmm.
it made me think of that other teaching that he said where you can light a candle, you can light almost 1,000 candles, and the first one isn't diminished. So it's just
Uh-huh.
made me think, just go around lighting candles.
There you go. Just share your wisdom. Discover the wisdom first.
Well, let's hear your wisdom.
I don't have any wisdom. Okay. Rogo.
That's okay. Just like you mentioned Ningma, and I was just like discussing that with my other weirdos yesterday. We were talking about tendrils.
You need them.
Well, that's the other different weirdos. Tendrils. Are you studying tendrils at all? Have you like about like we were talking about what it seemed to mean was that it was that you have these links that pass through the path and these stains or kind of like box shots, but there seem to be different. Like for instance, you might be driving along and somebody on the side of the road that need your attention, you go by and you give them last rites or something, and that's like a tendril of karmic linking.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my question. Okay, I thought it was pretty dumb.
Were you asking about tendril, like the English word tendril?
Well, no, what the Ningma would use it. Like they were using the word tendril.
Yeah, there is a
You have that book.
there's a Dharma because I have that book. It must be in this book. I'm sure it is.
Golden nugget. Thank you. Very sweet. Very sweet. Anyway, I was just mentioning
Yeah.
in the Nyingma, there's a word, or maybe it's in all Buddhism, as Kempo likes to say, all Buddhism's the same, and as you mentioned today, Frank, that is true. But in the Nyingma, have this word called the tendrils, and it somehow means some sort of karmic link that follows you through all of your births.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
Easy answer.
Yeah, that's why I figured I wouldn't put it on the microphone. I was just wondering
The
because
dragon
I wasn't
voice.
even sure we're being recorded anymore.
Yeah, there
Pleasure all
is
here.
there is a Tibetan word tendril,
Yeah.
but I don't want to talk about it because I don't know enough about
Okay.
that
Very good.
actual
Right on.
word.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
All right.
good one.
All right. Steffi has a question too.
Earlier, I think you were reading from the giant red book. Something about,
The History of the Nyingma Lineage by Dudjom Rinpoche.
I'm not sure if it was in that or not, but
Yeah.
it struck me. You said something about if you are perceiving suffering sentient beings, it's a misperception. Did I get that right?
If you, our practice is even the division of wisdom and compassion. For the Buddha, there's no division of wisdom and compassion. So for us, we see appearances, and then we have this great teaching of emptiness. And so one can be meditating and even sort of, be experiencing emptiness, you might say. And then in the between meditation system, sessions, is walking around practicing compassion. So we're practicing wisdom, and then we're doing compassion. As long as you're doing that, you're not fully realized. The path itself came out of Buddha's realization. So the faith that we can have is that even when we're doing these things, they're sacred in a sense. In other words, they work. Again, this word dharma in India had he has them in this book, I think, 13 different meanings. But worldly meanings, obligation, law, appearances, like phenomenon, our English word phenomenon, dharmas. But then there's dharma with a capital D. Those are said to be the sublime dharmas, the sublime appearances, which are sort of in accord, even in our deluded way, accord with our true nature. So when we practice on those things, we're actually practicing our true nature, even though we don't see it. It seems artificial, be filling bowls or something. But it's different than just, it's like you can meditate on a stone, that's good, but you can also meditate on a seed syllable of a Buddha, which is actually more powerful. But that takes faith to believe that. And even without faith, people experience it, so that's good. Faith grows. So what he's saying is that as long as we're dividing We're appearances and emptiness, that we don't see that the appearances are emptiness. We still have further way to go. But that's not a way for putting people down. It's just, it shows you the profundity of the realization. There's no alternating, going back and forth anymore, just abiding in our true nature. Does that answer it?
Thank you, yes.
That last question, it made me think of a teaching that Garch Rinpoche gave when I was in Arizona. It was more pertaining about like the subjugation of like negative emotions, but you know, in a similar way, it's sort of about just like how those are like afflictive emotions are like a just misperception of one's own like natural awareness. This, he kind of, I remember him kind of chuckling about it, and he was like, in the fun, like one of the funniest parts is that like people don't realize that like wisdom, and the word we use for wisdom, is actually also an afflictive emotion.
Yes.
You're still, that's another thing you have to like dispel.
Right.
And he's like, that's just like another day.
Right.
Not worth
That's right.
talking.
That's not, it's wisdom with a capital W and compassion with a capital C. Whereas we have, our English is not developed in a dharmic way and for dharmic purposes. So we say compassion, we can actually be misled, you know?
Exactly.
And wisdom, we're misled too. We think wisdom is having lots of ideas floating around your head or something. A lot of experience with those ideas. You know, they sort of overlap, sort of, but non-conceptual wisdom.
Yeah.
It's true.
I just think, just in him pointing to the profundity of it in a similar way. It's just
And that's expressed in the Tantra by, here are our 5 afflictive emotions, right? Greed and jealousy and all the stuff. And when we visualize ourselves as Vajrakalaya, he's got a crown of 5 Buddhas. Those 5 Buddhas represent each one of those, the 5 Buddha families represent the 5 major afflictive emotions. Actually, there are 84,000 afflictive emotions, but we won't get into that. 5 afflictive emotions. But this shows you the transformation of it. So it's also expressed in that story that sorry, I'm getting old, I forget his name. Not Dzongtsar Khyentse, one of his teachers. Regardless, anyway. Dingo Khyentse, thank you. Yeah. So on the, what's our situation as human beings? We're walking through a forest, and the forest is these trees that have poisonous trees. So we're in a bad situation, and always the stuff we're doing, we're always causing more and more poisonous trees to grow up with more poisonous fruit, and this is the nature of First Noble Truth, samsara. So what do? Well, the practice is we take an axe. It's a very heavy axe because it's the practice of concentration, mindfulness, calming the mind. So our concentrated mind is heavy axe, but very sharp. Sharp is the correct view, vipassana. And with that sharp axe, we're chopping down the poisonous trees, and they all fall down and they're done. So that's one kind of practice, right? And that level of practice, the male form is superior to the female form. Nobody knows why, just the way it is. But then in the next level, we're doing the conventional Mahayana, what the Dalai Lama teaches. We're walking through the same poisonous forest. There are the same poisonous trees, same situation. What do? We take, with this level of practice, we pick the fruit, and we take a little antidote of it, sort of like homeopathy or something, or taking a hair off the tail of the dog that bit you when you got a hangover. You take a little bit of that. So what does that mean? It means when we experience the suffering of anger and hatred, our awareness, we take the awareness of that and use that as an antidote to generate patience, the antidote. So this level of practice comes to full Buddhahood now, not just the trees falling down, but the trees can still be there, and yet we're enlightened. At this level of practice, male, female doesn't make any difference as far as realization. Now, at that first level, don't misunderstand, women can still be enlightened. It's just the male form is a little bit more conducive to just renouncing things, I guess. I don't know why. But the tantric level of practice, we're going through the same poisonous tree for us, according to Dingo Khyentse. And now, what do? we pick that poisonous fruit and take a big bite of it. This is the tantric way. At this level, the female form is superior. So the Tibetans, this stuff, we can't just go by surface appearances on these things or putting our own modern political projections onto this. Because the Tibetans say this is the most efficacious type of practice in a time which is marked by everything being upside down, where the virtues are considered by a society as being non-virtuous and vice versa. So female form is superior, but males can come to enlightenment this way too. And then at the same time, the Tibetan, old warrior society is very patriarchal in form, and yet this is what they believe. So this is, I kind of think, like a saving grace of them, it's all complete. So at any rate, this is what's so remarkable, because those poisonous emotions, our afflictive emotions in the Pure Land, the tantric view, are the 5 Buddhas. They're 5 wonderful qualities. And so we see into the nature of them. And you can see what this means, even on a conventional level. It means you're free to be yourself. You're not rejecting. I'm not supposed to be experiencing anger. No, Lama Tarchin said when anger comes up, we're rich. We've got all the stuff we need to practice. We have all the stuff we need to experience our true nature right then, right there. He said tremendous fire is tremendous wisdom. Tremendous fire, wisdom is tremendous fire, immediately consumes. And so the anger is experienced, but it's not experienced as anger. Rather, you might say the pure energy of it. And it's certainly not projected out on others as hatred. Instead, you're whole and complete. You can handle your anger. And that's, on the level when it's arising. Garamche said too, there's, like Milarepa was like a full Buddha, but he was like the sun coming up at dawn. And Shakyamuni was like the sun at full noon. So there are distinctions, there are gradations, and this is why the gradual path is so helpful, because you don't get into some situation of just black or white, so to speak. All right, let's take our break, and we'll come back.